Hi everyone, now that we created the database and tables, it's time to start running commands on those tables. So usually SQL commands are broken down into 5 categories: DDL, data definition language; DQL, data query language; DML, data manipulation language; DCL, data control language; and TCL, transaction control language. And DDL, we used them already. One, when we created the database and table, so it's create, alter, drop, and truncate. So these are important features to know. Right now we'll just be focused on create, which we already done, so like on creating the tables. And if you need to review back how we did that, feel free to review the previous lesson before this. The alter is usually used sometimes too when you want to add a column or update like a store procedure. Drop, you can drop a table, truncate a table. Now DCL is usually used more when you're a DBA, a database administrator, so like granting access or revoking access. Now transaction control is usually done when you want to commit actual transactions to the database or roll back to undo those transactions. So it's actually how the data is finally pushed to the database. So right now we won't get into it. This is more, the importance to understand this too is that you can use this with DML commands like insert, delete, and update. But also too, it's important when the data is being backed up and restoring data, so understand how that data is being pushed to the database and then how to retrieve that data and what has been saved and what can be recovered. And data manipulation language is insert, update, delete, log, call, and explain. So right now, like in the previous video, we already went over insert when we insert it into a table, update when you want to update a record, and delete too when you want to delete a record too. You can delete a table too as well using the delete command. Now table logs is usually making sure SQL also has something running in the back, making sure that not all the let's say for example, if one record has been updated, it's making sure that that record gets updated only one transaction at a time, saying that if you want to update it to one user is going to update it to one, but then if the other user wants to update that record to two, it will have to wait. It cannot do them at the same time, or else it will lock that table in order to prevent that. Now the main command that I want to focus on is that DQL, data query language, and this deals with the select command. So this is the most used command in SQL, and it's important to understand it. And the select command can be used with functions, classes, date functions. So it's really important to understand them too, and I'll go over them in this video. That way you don't feel overwhelmed and start off with the easy ones. Now let's review the data in our database. So our database is stored. What you can do is click on the plus sign, go to tables, and you can select from the table by doing a select top 1000 rows. So right away, SQL Server uses the top function that it has there too. And if you're using MySQL, this is a bit different. I know that MySQL uses a limit 100 or something like that. So, and it's usually at the end of the query. So there's just a little bit of differences between SQL engines. But over here, since we have only 4 rows, it wouldn't matter. But let's say select top 3 so you can see the difference. So right now we see 4, Let's run a query. There we go. So now it filters down to the top 3 records. So this is great too. Let's say when there's like a million rows of information, like if you were filtering like an Amazon orders table or customers table, you don't want to do select star asterisk. So select asterisk or star is usually means select all the records from the table. And this is customer. And let's go to the correct database too. So over here on top it ran under masters because it was calling it directly. It says store.dbo.customer. But now on this one, since I don't have that extension, I have to be in the correct database. So that always happens too. So just be aware of, make sure to look at where your database is, where your session is running on which database. So let's run this statement. So as you notice, when you do asterisk, it also returns all the column names. But on the top one, it returned all the columns, but it was because it was specified the column's name. So let's say we only want this 2 columns name. So then we only get the 2 columns that we mentioned here in the select statement. And as you can see over here, they can be in different lines or they can be on the same line. And spacing doesn't really matter here. That's the thing with SQL. It allows so much liberty on the syntax as long as it's in the correct order. So this will run the same. And now let's say you want to know how many rows are in that table. You can use the count. And this function is really useful once you learn to use it with other functions as well, such as the group by. So now if somebody was asking you how many rows are in that table, you can say 4 instead of counting them. But now let's say let's use the count function while filtering other data. And then a shortcut to run execute is F5. As hopefully it does show on my screen recorder, but F5. I'll make a comment here, and comment is made by using 2 dashes. So F5. And remember, if we don't highlight it like this, that means that it's only gonna run this section. But if we just press execute, it's gonna run this select statement, this select statement. So just be aware of that. And that's important too when you're updating records or deleting information. But as I mentioned, let's combine the count where using the where clause. Let's say now we only want the customer's first name to be John. So first name. And if you have IntelliSense, you can just click that. Equals, since it's a character, you need a single quotes and John. Now what is also flexible with SQL Server, you can type lowercase John and it will still match. It should match the data. Let's find out and check. There we go. But now let's add a space there. Okay, so I was able to, but let's add a space in the front. There we go. So that's something to be aware of, that making sure sometimes you're copying data from Excel or it's in the database. So this is important if it has spacing, leading spaces. And SQL Server also has a function there too where it can trim the spaces. So it's called ltrim parentheses. So what this will do, this is going to trim all the spaces to the left of this field. Let's say somebody saved it with spaces, right? But that's only going to trim the spaces to the left. Now to trim the spaces to the right, you need an rtrim. So now it's going to trim spaces from left and right. And in our cases, it wouldn't matter since we inserted this record without any spaces, but that's something to keep in mind. But now, as we mentioned too, let's use this with the count. And as you can see, we have two records of customers' first name being John. So that's helpful combining, knowing how to combine everything in one select command. Sometimes I say command, sometimes I say statement, so I do apologize on that. I usually mean the same thing. But now let's say we only want to pick one. So let's use the top one, and let's say I want to return all the columns associated with it. There we go. And then also when you're dealing with dates, a simple one can be just selecting the get date. So select get date. Oh, I forgot the T. So these are what is called window functions in SQL Server. And yeah, depending on which engine you use, I'm not sure if MySQL has a function like this, but I'm pretty sure they do. So what this does is just returns the date back, the date and time. And one thing to keep in track, this is based on the date and time that your SQL Server has set up here. And we'll be using this function in order to create code and run store procedures later on, but it is I think everybody should know it. That way from there we can either trim the time, use it as a date only, get the month, get the day. So it's I think everybody should get used to this and having it saved in case they need it, because yeah, SQL has a lot of useful functions already built for date and time that, I mean, we don't have to create already. Also, let's see, we already use count and sum. Let's try, let me see if we can use the sum. Sum function is usually used on numeric values. So what it does, like over here, if I say sum customer ID, it's gonna add 1, 2, and 3, so that should give us 6. So let's use it. I know that right now we wouldn't use that in the real world, but let's say these are just for numeric values. Or let me try orders. Let me see if we placed like a numeric column in there. So over here we can add all of the SLAs too, or complete it. What's interesting here too let's use the count and sum function on the column completed. So you will say sum column name from table name is orders, and you can use the use command to switch over to databases as well. So let's say store and highlight it. See, if you look on top, that also switched us to the correct database. Did I misspell the column name? Oh, okay. I think because I used it as a bit. Okay, that's why. So one way to check on your data, no, let's say it's an int. Let me try something. Well, it makes sense to use the select command right at it first. Ironic that this is covering the select command, and I forgot about it. But let's go back to completed. So we got 9. So remember, it was only the number 1, so I added them all, so it's saying 9. But if you notice something, let's do a select on both. So we have 9 records, right? So now let's use the count. You see how both of them return 9, but let's look at what each one did. So just be careful by confusing both of them. So let's look over our data. So remember, the sum needs a numeric value in the column. So what it was doing, let's say this was 2. If it was 2, it would have added the number 2. So our answer would have been 10. But count, what count is doing is just counting it by row. So count was saying is 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 9 rows. So just be careful on that. Because sometimes even myself, when I was starting SQL, I will get them confused. So just remember, sum, just keep it for numerical calculations. And let's try average on SLA and see what we get. So average is AVG, and let's try it on the SLA column. Press F5. So it's saying that the average SLA is 2. So that's pretty simple to understand. It's usually, trying to find the average. It uses the same calculation as well. But yeah, I recommend playing around with the select command, writing your own queries, and using them with the where clause, using them with the functions I demonstrated today. It's that way you can get familiar and see how to run SQL commands. And the more familiar usually that you get with the data and the tables, and then also combining it with functions, it helps improve your SQL and what you're trying to find, what you're trying to display to other users, especially when you start creating dashboards. So play around with them. Don't be afraid if you get confused, but we'll be adding to it, and in our next video we'll start using joins, so that way we can start combining data not only from one table but multiple tables, and understanding the importance and how everything, what we're selecting from different tables, and representing the data back from the users. But as always, thank you for watching the video. I do appreciate a like, subscribing too, as I will keep uploading videos.